وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين المظلومين المنتجبين الذين أذهب الله عنهم الرجس وطهرهم تطهيرا. قل رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. أما بعد، قال الله تبارك وتعالى في كتاب الكريم: بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. وما من دابة في الأرض إلا على الله رزقها. صدق الله العلي العظيم. زينوا مجالسكم بالصلوات على محمد وآل محمد. There's a request to please move forward. If I may request, if you could all please move forward. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. صلوا على محمد وآل محمد. My respected elders, brothers and sisters in Islam and Iman, here in Melbourne or across the globe, wherever you're hearing my voice, Salamun alaikum jami'an wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Question: what is the relationship between Islam and economics? When you come to our modern world, one of the things that governs much of our society is the area of economics. And whether we realize it or not, economics has a big impact on our society and our world. When we look at Islam and we say Islam, and Allah says in the Quran, Inna ad-deena 'inda Allahi al-Islam, that is most surely the deen near Allah is Islam. If something is truly a deen in the sense of it is a comprehensive way of life, it should tell me something about my livelihood. It should tell me something about my sustenance. It should tell me a little bit about economics and how do I earn and how should I earn. And if it doesn't, then how can I truly call it a comprehensive way of life? Therefore, in tonight's conversation, building on the future of our community in light of Karbala, I want to look at what is Islam's vision of economics and economic development, of finance, of commerce, of professional careers. Meaning, when our youth go to university or they plan to go into careers, does Islam give them any guidance on what they should do? Or is it just that Islam says, just recite Quran and then Alhamdulillah and say Inshallah and MashaAllah and then you just go on? Or does Islam actually have some substance therein? And so I want to look at, what does the Quran teach us about economics? What does the teachings of the Ahlul Bayt teach us with respect to this? How is it that even the scholars discuss some aspects of economics and finance that you may not have heard of or you may have heard of? And how does this relate to the practice of the Ahlul Bayt? Therefore, is it that the Ahlul Bayt encouraged and the Quran encouraged and Islam encouraged to be poor? That you should just be in poverty all the time? Or was there a different vision? What's the difference between wealth and materialism? Is there some difference between the two? Can someone have wealth and not be materialistic? Or is it a necessity? And the final thing that I want to discuss is, how is it that Imam Hussain even kept this in mind when he went to the plains of Karbala in the 61st year of Hijrah? This is our agenda for today. Wherever you are, here in Melbourne or across the globe, from the bottom of your heart, send a salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. At the first level, my dear brothers and sisters, wherever you're hearing my voice, this idea that sometimes we have limited Islam to just what we hear from the mimbar, for example. And if I invite you as parents, as young ones, take Islam into your hands. Sometimes we don't even realize that we have outsourced our thinking to the mimbar. Meaning, only the person sitting on the mimbar is to think. I should not think at all, no one else should think. Meaning, if we are not thinking and reading the books of the Quran, the Ahlul Bayt, Nahjul Balagha, how will we grow spiritually? Or else, you know what happens as a result of this? Corruption. Not necessarily. But, for example, if I come here and I say something, and I I say something, you've never heard of it. But you've also not spent time learning and discussing. I can come here and I can abuse this place, and I can tell you anything I want. And you won't know if it's true or not. So there's a necessity to also understand the comprehensive nature of the religion, number one. Number two, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the verse that I recited at the beginning, He says, وَمَا مِن دَابَّةٍ فِي الْأَرْضِ إِلَّا عَلَى اللَّهِ رِزْقُهَا. So Allah is saying, there is nothing that Allah has made on this land except that its rizq, its sustenance, Allah has maintained, Allah has ordained. Now, when it comes to this, does this mean that everything is qada and qadar, that is, everything has been predetermined, or not? Now, there are riwayat from Ahlul Bayt, in particular, Amir al-Mu'mineen, he says there are two types of rizq, two types of sustenance, two types of income, two types of form of rizq, sustenance that you get. One, it will find you wherever you are. It is ordained for you. Whether you like it or not, it will come to you. But there's another type that you have to go after it. So stay with me here. They asked Amir al-Mu'mineen, they said, Ya Ali, how is it that there's a type of sustenance that will get to you no matter what? And he said, it's the same way that death will find you wherever you are. That rizq will find you, but that's not comprehensive. So for example, I'll give you an example. You go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and say, Ya Allah, I worked hard in life, but this other person, they became a billionaire. And I followed Ahlul Bayt, I followed Islam, I followed everything, and I didn't become a billionaire or millionaire or things like this. And you may say, you only wrote this much for me. And Allah says, no, sorry. I wrote much more for you. But you didn't work for that extra amount that was written for you, but you needed to work for. I made sure you had food on the table. I made sure that there was basic necessities there. But beyond that was your job, to ensure that you created a vehicle for the income to come to you. Number two, now when it comes to this, Allah has said that there is this element that is there, in terms of He's made everyone's rizq. Now question, but what about those people who go to sleep hungry? There are people who go to sleep hungry in the world, in our neighborhood sometimes. Now this is where Allah has made the arrangement. But it's possible that Allah has given your rizq, but that rizq is supposed to keep moving in society. And someone has hoarded it. And this happens in our world. Some big brands in the world, they don't let their items, for example, clothes. Some of these famous logos, they don't let their clothes be sold at too much of a discount. And you know what they do? If they can't sell it, they burn it. And now, mashallah, it's in vogue, it's in fashion, that we're doing sustainable energy, so we'll burn it. Or for example, crops. Do you know how many crops are destroyed just to keep the prices at a certain level? And then we say Allah is to blame. Hold on a second. What about insan? What about human beings? And them doing the corruption that is leading to this? Allah has done His part. But if you have greed and insan has greed, that's different. That's where you and I must say that we must fight for the justice of all. Number two, the next level of this is looking at what did Allah say about His own Prophet. So now, Allah said He's made the arrangements. The examples of the prophets, Dawood alayhi salam. Dawood was living off the public treasury. Dawood was given the kingdom. When Dawood was given the kingdom, he was taking the money that he was getting and he was living off the income of the kingdom. And then Allah says to him, if you recall, Allah said to Dawood, Dawood, I love the one who works for their income. I love the one who earns their income, who works for it. And so, Dawood didn't know what to do. So he wept and he did dua and he cried for Allah to eventually teach him something. And after 40 days, his dua was accepted and Allah taught him how to mold iron. Ya mulayyin al-hadid li Dawood. The ability to mold the iron, Allah gave it to him. And he worked and he made shields and other things through the metal and through the iron, and he earned an income. Allah is telling His Prophet, even you should not sit at home, you should work and be enterprising in order to earn your income. Do not live off the public treasury if you do not need to, number one. Number two, when it comes to this, we have narrations that Sulaiman, now you may say, how is it that I should go higher? How is it that I should work? How is it that I should earn my income and my rizq and my livelihood? And you'll find that even the Anbiya asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give them something to earn from, for example. Sulaiman said, Ya Allah, give me habli mulkan, Ya Allah, give me a mulk, a kingdom, the likes of which no one has ever seen before. And Allah gave Sulaiman the kingdom of not only insan, but of birds, of jinn, of all of the creation. So one may say, was Sulaiman being arrogant? Ya Allah, give me the kingdom that no one has ever had before. Was he being Pharaoh? No. He was trying to say and show that, Ya Allah, I want to use this gift that you're giving to do justice on earth. To show people that someone can be a ruler and they can also be just. They can be a ruler and they can also be good. Why is it that the ruler should always be Pharaoh? Why is it the ruler that should always be Namrud? Why should the ruler always be a Zalim? Why should the ruler always be Yazid? Why not that some good person also comes and rule? So Sulaiman said, Ya Allah, give me this ability. And Allah gave him the ability to lead a kingdom of great levels. Next level, Musa, in the story, if you know, Musa had to flee Egypt and he went towards Madian, where he met Shu'aib, and he married the daughter of Shu'aib. And eventually the Quran says he spent 8 or 10 years working with Shu'aib. Further than this, when you look at the example of the other prophets, Yusuf alayhi salam, Yusuf is thrown into the well by his brothers. When he's thrown into the well by his brothers, then they take him into Egypt. He's sold into Egypt. When he's sold into Misr, then eventually he goes and he becomes a servant. Then the thing with Zulaykha happens. He's thrown into prison. When he's thrown into prison, eventually what happens is, one of his companions, he begins to interpret dreams because Allah gives him this gift. When Allah gives him this gift, one of his companions leaves the prison and Yusuf says to me, remember me on the other side. And so when the king and the ruler sees this dream where he sees 7 heavy cows followed by 7 skinny cows, he says, what's the meaning of this? And at that point in time, he remembers who was his companion in the prison, Ashab al-Sijni. He says, my companion's in the prison. He said, my companion in the prison, he knows how to interpret the dream. Then he calls on to Yusuf. And Yusuf says that this dream means that there will be 7 good years economically. There will be 7 years where the crops will produce well. But it will be followed by 7 years where there will be drought, where there will be famine. And he said that we must make arrangements for it. So then what? Then Yusuf, when the ruler said, what should I do with him? What should I do with you? Yusuf himself says, make me the minister of finance for the government. And the ruler of the time made him the minister of finance. And the decision was made what? 7 years when there's good crops, we're going to accumulate and stow. We're going to use what we need, but we're also going to save in silos certain amount of crops for the rainy days, for the days that are, for example, in famine and drought. So exactly as Yusuf had said, for 7 years there was good crop production, and after that 7 years it was barren. And that's when Yusuf's brothers came back, when there was a famine, to try to get some food. Now Yusuf could have said that, Ya Allah, just put me back in prison, or just make me a laborer, or make me a servant. No, he said, I'm good with numbers, I'm good with finance, I'm good with economics, make me the minister of this domain. So Allah is telling us there's a precedent here. Further than this, Rasulullah, the Holy Prophet, Sallallahu Alaihi Muhammad wa Ali Muhammad. Did he do anything? In fact, you'll find in early life he was a shepherd. In fact, many of the Anbiya were shepherds in the early phase of their life. And it's one of the best trainings for leadership, they say. Why? Because you have all these animals and you have to bring them together and you have to try to get them in one direction. Some know, some don't know. You have to lead them. So Allah made them get this training. Now, this level was one. But eventually Rasulullah, if you remember, he was an active merchant, an active trader, an active entrepreneur, an active businessman. To the point that in early Islam, even before Islam came, we say Rasulullah did tabligh for 23 years. He did tabligh, he announced at age 40, and he did tabligh for 23 years, and he died at 63. But in reality, he was having public tabligh for 23 years. But the first 40 years of his life was silent tabligh. He was still doing tabligh. He was building his character. That's why everyone said he's sadiq and ameen. The principle is, Rasulullah first showed and convinced people with his akhlaq. If you see someone somewhere, anywhere, they're saying Islam, 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 follow this, I know Islam, but there's no akhlaq, then you know they're not following the sunnah of Rasulullah. You know they're not following the sunnah of the Ahlul Bayt. You know that for sure, because the prerequisite of how the Ahlul Bayt showed that they are on the right path was by convincing people of their character. They knew for 40 years nobody could lift a finger and say Muhammad had lied, cheated, steal, was someone who was dishonorable or anything. So now, Rasulullah, even in his early youth, before the age of 40, he was part of a pact called Half al-Fudul, the League of Justice. Meaning what? A man had come to do business. People used to come to Mecca to do business and trade in the trading season, in the Hajj season, in the pilgrimage season. Even before Islam, they used to have the pilgrimage. And so at that point in time, when he comes, he had been robbed blind. Essentially, he had given his goods and he did not get payment. When he did not get payment, he went and he called out on a high place in a mountain or a hill to the people. He said, "Oh people, I came to your city and I came to do business and I came to do to be a merchant and to trade, and I have been done unjustly. Is there anyone to give me justice?" At that time, Rasulullah, amongst a few others, got together and they said, "Look, this is not good for the economy of Mecca. That what will happen is somebody comes and the reputation spreads that someone came and they were robbed or they didn't get their just income that they were due. Then people will say Mecca is not a place to go. So it's bad for him, it's bad for us." The alignment of incentives was very important, meaning that they understood that, okay, let this go. If they let it go, it would cause larger problems down the road. That's why justice is so fundamental in Islam. Justice in terms of economics, justice in terms of society, justice in terms of life. Meaning what? When it comes to this, justice, in Khutbah Fadakiyya, Lady Fatima Zahra says something. She gives some of the istidlal as to why Allah implemented certain rulings. You know, when it comes to the why of ahkam, we don't know necessarily unless the Ahlul Bayt have told us. This is what the scholars say. But in this instance, she says that Allah wished that you have justice amongst yourselves, so there is love amongst your hearts. She says in the khutbah. Meaning what? If there is no love amongst the hearts of the believers, that means there is injustice somewhere. Meaning, if you want to have justice, it will ultimately lead to a better harmonious environment for everyone. So Rasulullah was part of this. But eventually, Rasulullah was also a merchant, a tajir, a merchant of the highest caliber, such that when he would go on the trade route from Yemen to Sham, every year he would come back with 3 times more profit than anyone else. And every year people would look for him to do business with him, because they said he's the most honest, he's the most trustworthy, and when you do business with him, what you see is what you get. And he established that reputation. Further than this, what is the vision? This is with respect to the Quran and the prophets. What is the vision of the Ahlul Bayt on this? Is it that the Ahlul Bayt told us, or Islam told us, that we should be poor, that we should be in poverty, that we should be stricken? I want to understand this from the Islamic perspective. Allow me to explain. We have narrations from the Ahlul Bayt that said that poverty leads towards kufr. What? Poverty leads towards kufr? Because the Ahlul, another tradition. Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen is on the record saying that if poverty, faqr, was a person, we would kill him. Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen is saying this. Why? Because if you look at insan, poverty, abject poverty, meaning you don't have food to eat, meaning you don't have anything. This does not increase your iman, it decreases your iman. Because you're not able to meet your basic necessities. Then what happens? You have to steal, or people go towards stealing, or they do other things that they shouldn't be doing just to survive. And so the first thing the Ahlul Bayt did when Imam Ali alayhi salam was ruling over the Muslim world, the first thing that he did was, he didn't make sure everyone gets very, very rich. He first said, nobody should go to sleep hungry first. So he made sure the basic bottom line elements were taken care of. Then he said, if you want to work beyond this and work harder, no problem. You're welcome to. Now comes the issue and the question about Amir al-Mu'mineen, and what is Islam's vision on this, and what is society's vision, and why is it so important for us to know this, and what happens if we don't? What happens in our world, in our society, if we don't? And what did the Ahlul Bayt mention here? Now stay with me here. We often hear that Imam Ali alayhi salam, 25 years his right was taken. And indeed, for 25 years his right was taken. But was he just sitting at home during that 25 years? Or was there something else he was doing? Yani, Amir al-Mu'mineen, was he just sitting there and saying, okay, I can't do anything, I'm a groom, I'm not going to do it. And if you read that period, you will find that Amir al-Mu'mineen was very active during that period. I invite you to read the pages of history. Example. Amir al-Mu'mineen in Usul al-Kafi. Remember, al-Kafi is considered our most authentic book of traditions. Yes, not everything in it is authentic, sure. But according to the ulama, it is one of the more authentic books that we have in terms of hadith. 4 books. Kutub Arba. Al-Kafi man la yahdaru al-faqih tahzib al-istibsar. In Al-Kafi, there's a riwayah that I want to share with you. What's the riwayah? The riwayah is that Amir al-Mu'mineen is that individual who, when we look at it, when he married Fatima al-Zahra, what did he have? When he married Fatima al-Zahra, the riwayah says that he had hardly anything. He had 1 horse, 1 shield, 1 sword, and some say 1 ring. That's it. Rasulullah said, Ya Ali, the sword that Islam needs. So he says, look, the horse you need in battle, Islam needs it for us. Said, bring sword. He said, the thing that you don't need and the other person needs is a shield. You don't need a shield, the other person needs a shield. So he said, sell the shield and go to the market and then you can marry Fatima al-Zahra. Because of the income that is needed for the marriage. So when this happens, he then makes the arrangements. Now this Amir al-Mu'mineen, who at the bare minimum at that time, because he was giving everything to Islam, eventually in Al-Kafi, and I want you to check this riwayah, it says that Amir al-Mu'mineen, with his own money, he freed 1,000 slaves. Question, where did he get the money for that? Stop here. Another riwayah. Imam Ali alayhi salam is ruling over the Muslim world 4 years, 9 months. 4 years and 4.5 plus years. He's ruling and he's doing the accounting. You know, accounting, the bookkeeping. He's crunching the numbers, as they say, in his office. To look at the budget. He's balancing the budget of the Muslim world. When he's balancing the budget of the Muslim world, there's a moment where 2 individuals want to have a meeting with Imam Amir al-Mu'mineen. Talha and Zubair, the riwayah says. So they wanted to ask for some additional income perhaps, and they wanted to have an audience with Imam Ali. They wanted to sit with Imam Ali while he's the Khalifatul Muslimin. Now of course, Amir al-Mu'mineen is Khalifatul Bilal Fasl as far as we are concerned. He has no need for the chair. The chair needs Ali. The Khilafah needs Ali, because Ali is going to bring justice. Now, he's sitting there and it's the evening time. There's a candle on the desk of Imam Ali alayhi salam. There's a candle on the desk for light and he's doing the bookkeeping. As soon as he sees those 2 individuals who wanted to have an audience with him, Amir al-Mu'mineen realized they have come. And as soon as they came to the door, Amir al-Mu'mineen saw the candle and he pulled out from his pocket another candle. That candle on the desk was perfectly fine. But he pulled out another candle, lit it, put it down on the desk, and he put out the first candle. And he put it away. Talha and Zubair, they came in and they said, Ya Ali, we have to ask you something, but before we ask that, can we ask you what you just did right now? What was this? This didn't make any sense to us. You had a candle that was perfectly fine, that was perfectly good on the table. And then you took out another candle from your pocket, lit it, put it on the desk, and then you removed the first candle. Why? It doesn't make any sense. We would understand if the candle's going out. But this doesn't make sense. Explain, please. Amir al-Mu'mineen said yes. He says, until this moment that you came into the room, I was doing the accounting and the public bookkeeping of the public treasury of the people. Therefore, I was using a candle that was purchased with the money of Baytul Mal, the public treasury. You 2 came to me on a private matter. I could not use a candle that was purchased by the public treasury for a private matter. Therefore, I took a candle from my own pocket and lit it and used it. Now you're welcome to talk to me. An individual who would not misappropriate even the wax of a candle is Amir al-Mu'mineen. You see, when we have role models, we have role models that were well ahead of the curve before our world and our society today. Today, the Australian government, the Canadian government, the American government, and the likes will say that one must not misappropriate funds. Sure, certainly. But if you want to know who laid this foundation, you have to go to Ali ibn Abi Talib 1400 years ago in terms of telling the world what is adala. That's why George Yordak, the Christian Lebanese man, wrote the book Sawt al-Adala al-Insaniya, the voice of human justice, in honor of Amir al-Mu'mineen. He said if human justice has a voice, it is the voice of Ali ibn Abi Talib. But what about you and I as followers of Ahlul Bayt, as followers of Ali ibn Abi Talib? Should we not be champions of that justice on earth? Social or economic or otherwise? So now stay with me. So this is one dimension. So where did Imam Ali alayhi salam, this Ali who would not even waste the wax of a candle, where did he get the money to free 1,000 slaves? A slave is not cheap. A slave is like a Range Rover, a Ferrari or Lamborghini of the time. It's expensive or something of this nature. It's not something that's easy. So how did he do that? The narrations say, and this is what is often not mentioned, for 25 years Imam Ali alayhi salam, he used to work. And first he started with a joint venture. You know, we say that Imam Ali worked in the bagh, in the garden of a Jewish man. The reality is, people think that he was employed, but he was not. It was a joint venture. They had an arrangement where they shared the profit based on Imam Ali doing the labor and the work, and the other person owning the land. And so Imam Ali was constantly encouraging this self-sufficiency and hard work. And he would develop this land, and to the point that for 25 years Imam Ali alayhi salam had built, he would go towards the outskirts of Medina and he would say, look, I'm going to earn my rizq and my livelihood. And people would say, Ya Ali, where are you going? And what do you have with you? He said, I'm going to the outskirts of town to do land development, as we would call it. And so they said, what's on your back? He had a sack on his back filled with something. He said, date palms, inshallah. Meaning what? He was saying that these were seeds at the time. But the vision of Imam Ali alayhi salam was to build these orchards. Eventually, you will notice that the Ahlul Bayt had 7 gardens that they had in the family that they would pass generation after generation. And they earned income from it. And they used that income not to buy fancy things for themselves, but to help society. To help free a slave, for example. To help someone who was not able to get married. To help people in different environments. This was the vision of the Ahlul Bayt. Further than this, when it comes to this, there's a narration that says Imam Ali alayhi salam one time during this period, he went to the outskirts of Medina. When he went to the outskirts of Medina, he began to dig and dig in the middle of the desert. You know, at that time, oil was water. Water was the oil of the time in terms of the currency. If you hit water, you were the richest person in town, because then you could use that for irrigation and canals and crops, and you could be very wealthy. You had the access to water. So at that point in time, Amir al-Mu'mineen, he goes and he strikes the ground and he works from day until evening, sweating in the field, trying to strike water to spring out. One day passes, the whole day people are watching, and then people begin to murmur. They say, Ali is going after dunya. Ali is going after dunya. Amir al-Mu'mineen worked until the end of the day, and then he went home. The next day he came again at the same place. He struck again, struck again, struck again, digging, 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 morning to evening. And the people are talking, Ali, Ali, Ali. We thought Ali was a man of deen. We had thought Ali was a man of Islam. Ali is going after this dunya. Third day, Imam Ali alayhi salam comes. When he comes on the third day, he strikes, he strikes, he strikes. And it's the peak of the day. And everyone's watching. They're saying, Ali, it looks like he's in battle, the way he's working. Eventually, he didn't get to what he was looking for. Eventually, he came out of the hole, which was quite big by now. And then he went back in. And when he went back in this time, he struck with the Haydari strike, and water sprouted out. Water sprung out and gushed out. And when the water came out, everyone began to say, Ali has become rich, Ali has become a millionaire, Ali has become the wealthiest person in town. And then Ali alayhi salam, Amir al-Mu'mineen says, bring me a paper and bring me a pen. You know, even before Islam, Imam Ali was one of the few people in all of Arabia who knew how to write, who knew how to read and write. There was only a handful of people. That's why in Hudaybiyah, Imam Ali is the one who wrote down. Nonetheless, Imam Ali said, bring me a pen and bring me a paper. They brought a pen and paper. He said, this property, this spring that I have dug, indeed is my right, but I am waqfing it to the people here. I am endowing it to the people here. I'm giving it to them. And he said, look, use the profit, use the income that is generated from here in order to do what? Number one, to look after the poor. Number two, to look after the orphans. Number three, to help young people who want to get married. For the wayfarer, the person who is traveling and they have no one. And of course the sick, the ill ones. And he wrote it and he left. He said, make sure that this is implemented. This is the master that we follow. This is the Mawla that we follow. This is the Amir that we follow. That is, there was nothing wrong in Imam Ali taking that. By the way, there were other springs and other things that he had done in order to build his own income. Now come to this. What is it with respect to this in the Ahlul Bayt? What do they teach us? Do the Ahlul Bayt give us any guidance on what should be our approach? Many young people, they come forward and they say, does Islam say anything about a job? Should I become a doctor, lawyer, engineer, dentist, journalist, economist, financier, banker? What should I become? A computer scientist, a programmer? Does Islam say anything? And indeed, there is something that Islam says clearly and categorically. And that is what? Tijara, business, entrepreneurship. In the riwayat, you will find that it is said there are 10 parts of rizq, 10 parts of sustenance, 9 of the 10 are in tijara. In Al-Kafi, another riwayat, there are 70, listen closely to this one, there are 70 parts of ibadah. How many? 70 parts of ibadah. The most afdal of them is what? Namaz, roza, hajj, zakat, khum. There are 70 parts of ibadah. The most afdal and the highest of them is to seek a halal livelihood, a halal sustenance. Did you ever hear that? This is the reality of the matter, but we don't discuss these aspects of Islam. You think and I think that sometimes when we go to work, we're not doing ibadah? How is it possible? Did we not remember that Rasulullah said that split your awake day into 3? One is seeking a halal rizq. One is in your ibadah between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And one with your family, with your friends, with your relatives, with your relations. This is what the balance of Islam was. Now, when it comes to tijara in this is a riwayah, 7th Imam. And you'll find this and check this in Al-Kafi, in the Bab of Sustenance and Rizq. Check this chapter. A man came to the 7th Imam and said, Ya Ibn Rasulillah, the Shias are becoming employed. They're getting jobs. He says, tell them to do business and tijara, it is better for them. For whoever becomes employed by someone, they limit their income. Limit. Imam's not saying don't do it, he's saying, but it's limited. The same thing that I said at the beginning. It's possible that Allah wrote a lot for you, but the tap, you know the faucet? You know when you open the faucet, sometimes it has a little spring, and sometimes you open it, it has much more flowing out. It's possible that the faucet that you put up is blocked because of what you chose as a career. Whereas Allah may have said that I have opened this other avenue for you to have much more. Now, when it comes to this, the vision of Islam was to use wealth to develop, to go further. Now you may say, how do you reconcile the last lecture and this lecture about knowledge and entrepreneurship and commerce and business? You see, when you have knowledge, you can do better. There's a relation between knowledge and reason and aql according to the Ahlul Bayt. Allow me to explain. The Ahlul Bayt, there was a companion of the 6th Imam by the name of Mu'adh. Mu'adh was someone who was a companion, and he said, Ya Ibn Rasulillah, the news had reached the Imam that Mu'adh, who was a garment seller, a cloth seller, a merchant of clothing, he had stopped doing business. So Imam sent a letter and a message to Mu'adh and said, Mu'adh, why have you stopped working? Why have you stopped doing business? Is it because you are too old, or you're unable to physically, or you're mentally not able to, or physically not able to, or something else? Can you please tell me? So then Mu'adh came to the Imam He said, Yabna Rasulullah, I got your message and I came to you and I came to tell you that the reason I've stopped working as a garment merchant, as a clothing merchant, I've stopped is because I have accumulated some savings. I've kept some savings and some income that I have. And number two, that's number one. Number two, I don't have any debts. I don't owe anyone any money. And he says, I think and I believe that the money that I have left will keep me till the end of my life. So essentially in our language, he had retired. He retired. He says, I have enough money. I think it'll take me to my death. I don't owe anyone. I'm good. Then the Imam says, look, if you are able to do business, continue to do business. The Imam says, number one, on the basis of do not become dependent on your dependents unless you have to. Do not become dependent on them. Earn for your dependents up until you are able to. Number one. And number two, this is the lesson that I want to learn. The Imam says, keep endeavoring in business because leaving it dulls the faculties. Now here is where I'm trying to invite you to think about the vision of the community. I want this next generation to get the top education, to become the top doctors, lawyers, engineers, entrepreneurs. You pick it, but get a few years of experience under your belt and then consider business and consider entrepreneurship. Consider that because that is where Allah has said the barakah is for you, and that's also how you can help the society and the community. Stay with me here. Now comes the big issue that people have. What about the risk? Not rizq, the risk, R-I-S-K. Meaning, what if it doesn't work? What if it doesn't, the business doesn't work? What if it fails? In America, the statistics show the average entrepreneur, the average businessman, they succeed not on their first, not on their second, but on their third and fourth attempt. But the reason is they learn such valuable things in the first and second attempt that they apply to the third and fourth. Meaning, there's no failure. There's just learning. So now, if you're someone who is 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 30, and you're saying, I don't know if I can take the risk of a business at this point in time, I'm giving you the secret. I'm giving you something, especially for my younger ones. What is it? The Ahlul Bayt have encouraged this to do business. But how do I do it? You start young. Get the first failure, the second failure. There's no failure, it's only learning. Do it while you're at mom and dad's house. So if it doesn't work, you still have a place to sleep, you still have a place to stay. So by that time when you're 16, 17, you've already done 1 or 2 attempts, and then you learn, and constantly be learning. You know, there's statistics around businesses and learning this, so that you work hard, earn a halal risk, and support others, employ others, grow the community. You don't think we have responsibilities locally and abroad? Do you know how many people who are followers of the Ahlul Bayt are suffering and they're going to sleep hungry? I can tell you, in my travels to Pakistan, in India, in Africa, throughout Europe, even in America, in our own backyards. You know these big cities that you hear about, Seattle, San Francisco, they have the wealthiest people in the world, but they have plenty of very, very poor homeless people. And it breaks your heart. In the richest part of the world. So you and I have a responsibility here. Do not think that Islam has encouraged you to be poor. Islam has encouraged you to work hard, use the abilities that Allah has given you in order to develop. And work harder. There's a moment in time where the fifth Imam al-Baqir is in the fields. When Imam Baqir is in the fields, now Imam Baqir used to run his university. And when he used to run his university, eventually what was happening was, one person said, I wish to advise Baqir, Muhammad al-Baqir, but he advised me instead. Do you know what happened? He said, I saw Muhammad al-Baqir in the field, working and perspiring in the field, doing manual labor. And I thought I would give him advice. I thought I would tell him, you know, you're going after this dunya. Yabna Rasulullah, you going after the dunya, why? This is below you, this is not something you should be doing. The riwayah says, Imam al-Baqir had gotten a little older, and he had the support of 2 servants who were helping him to support him when he was doing the physical work. He says, I approached al-Baqir And when I approached him, I said, Al-Baqir, what will happen if Malakul Maut will take you in this state? Now the Imam understood that he was implying and saying that if you die in this state, you'll be dying going after dunya. The Imam was working on the field. The riwayah says he supported himself with the two servants, and he picked himself up and he looked at him in the eye and he said, if I die in this state, I will die in a state of ibadah. And he continued to do his work. You see, we sometimes think that only reciting Quran is ibadah, only namaz is ibadah. But Islam's vision was not like this. Islam's vision was to live a complete life. And in everything that you do, you try to make the world a better, more just, more fair place. And that is part and parcel of Iman. You see, when we come to our modern world, as I'm drawing to a conclusion here, you need to know the systems that govern our world. And economics and money has a big impact on our world, whether we realize it or not. Some people use it for good, some people don't use it for good. I'm inviting you to make a halal rizq, to make a substantial amount, but use it for good. Use it for helping people, use it for investing in the community. Now, I want to share, does Islam have any vision of systems of economics, of systems of development, or not? Now, by the way, when I say do business, I was in one community and they said, what do you mean do business? Open a barber shop or a restaurant? There are more businesses than this. Although, I want you to look at the industries in the world. Look at the industries of mining, of industrial, of engineering, chemicals. You go down the list, there's so many industries you may not be aware of. That's where the world already is, and then the world where the world is going. This is why it's so important for us to have these visions of what you should be doing. So if Islam encourages them, get an education constantly, and also be considering tijara and business so you can develop the community to become stronger. Now, when it comes to this, does Islam have a vision for economics or not? Or are there things that we may have heard, but they're not the whole picture, they're not the complete picture? Allow me to give you an example. I want you to read Islam, and I'm telling this for my next generation, so you know that those questions that you have in the back of your mind, someone has tried to address them in the hawza or in the scholarship, but they may not have trickled down to you. What do I mean? There is a view of all of our scholars, and there's a consensus amongst them that riba is haram, is not allowed. Riba is not allowed. I want to share with you one view that is from Shaheed al-Sadr, Sayyid Muhammad Baqir al-Sadr, rahmatullahi alayhi. This scholar is mainstream. No one can say he's not mainstream. He's the backbone of mainstream in some sense. In fact, there are marajah today who said, if he was alive, we would not declare our marja'iyya. Now, this Baqir al-Sadr had a view that differed from the consensus. Now stay with me here. If you go to the Bible is against riba. The Quran is against riba. Islam is against riba. But what is riba? Is riba interest? Or is riba something else? It's a good question. I want you to do your own research. Because if you and I know when I went to college, many of you went to college, you go to a business school, you go to MBA, you go to study, the first thing they teach you is time value of money. Money has a value. And the time associated with the money has a value. Meaning, if you give me $100 today, and I give you $100 in 1 year, is it the same $100? No. Is inflation, opportunity cost, several other things that go into the equation. Or you could have used that money and invested in and you've done something. You forsake that and then you did that. Now, every other scholar disagreed. Refer to your marja on this. I'm telling you this so you understand the house as a university where people share diverse opinions. Shaheed al-Sadr had studied capitalism, communism, and he laid the foundation of Islamic economics. In fact, you can read his work. It's called Iqtisaduna, our economics, along with Falsafatuna, our philosophy. And in that he said, look, the vision of Islam, and in his views and his afkar, he mentioned this. He said, look, Islam was against riba. The Bible was against riba. In his view, only his view, don't misunderstand what I'm saying. He said riba is not interest. Riba is usury. There's a difference. And मैं जो कह रहा हूँ उसका जिम्मेदार हूँ, जो आप समझ रहे हैं उसका जिम्मेदार आप हैं. Understand that he said that there's a difference between usury and interest. So then he said his view, and this is where he said, based on his understanding, something to make the other person whole again is acceptable. So he said a flat rate of interest to me, which is something that just makes the other person back to whole, is acceptable. He said Islam was against loan sharking. Loan sharking is different, usury is different. That's economic enslavement. Check this by yourself. Why do I say this? Because when you talk to young people and you say, what's the Islamic model of economics? They say, mudaraba, mufadara, all this is good. It's all good, but essentially it's the same thing. The only difference is niyyah, intention. And that's where it's important for us to realize Islam did have a concept of intention, number one. And number two, our scholarship has diverse views, diverse opinions. Now, I'm not saying go follow whatever you want. What I'm saying is, know what you follow. It's possible that you have one vision, but Islam is much more diverse than that. So now when it comes to this, consider educating yourself throughout life, and also consider tijara in an industry, in a professional sector. Combining what Sayyid Sistani said is specialize in an area. And when you do that, you'll get further. The Ahlul Bayt were constantly telling their generations to do economic development. You know what's another area that they said? Real estate. They encouraged one to have property. And there are numerous riwayat on this. So it's important for us to not think the Ahlul Bayt just want us to live. There's two ways to look at this world has no value. When someone says, Islam said this dunya has no value. Really? Then why would Imam Ali alayhi salam work so hard as a ruler of the Muslim empire? Why would he work so hard in the fields? Why would he work so hard feeding the orphans in the middle of the night? Why did Rasulullah spend 23 years and before that 40 years doing tabligh and trying to change the world if the world has no value? The reality is this world is a platform for us to achieve akhirah. And we must struggle in this world in order to achieve that akhirah. If you and I just get very simple and complacent and relaxed, we may not be fulfilling our responsibility of what Allah has willed. Remember, there are two things in modern economics, and I'm drawing to a conclusion here. Mandeville was a doctor who wrote a poem. Mandeville was a Dutch-English physician, and he wrote a poem that impacted economics. And in this he wrote a fable. He used an isti'ara. Isti'ara is the Arabic, Urdu, Farsi word for an analogy, a metaphor. And in this isti'ara, he said it's called the fable of the bees. He wrote one first, it was called Rumble of the Bees, then he wrote another one called the Fable of the Bees. And he put a tough haqa'iq in front of the world, a tough reality. He said, look, in his isti'ara, he said there's one colony or one beehive that is doing everything right. They are doing things that are pious and righteous and this and that and the other, but they are dirt poor. And then there's another hive that there are vices and there's problems and there's this and there's that, but they're wealthy. Now most people said he's doing heresy, he's doing something totally wrong. But the economists of the day understood that he was pointing to a reality. He said, private vices, public goods. He said that if society is perfect, then then there would be no need for police, there would be no need for lawyers, there would be no need for any people to solve the problems of the society. And then eventually other people came forward and said that he has a point, we need something going on, but it has to be controlled. This was his view. I'm not telling you this is my view or Islam's view, I'm just telling you what happened. Then came Adam Smith. And Adam Smith was known as the father of economics. In 1776 he puts out his Wealth of Nations, and he also identified that look, there's going to be this sense of industrialization, and what's happening is this individuality that's taking place, the deconstruction of labor. In the past, somebody was a carpenter. In the past, someone was an artist. Someone was a craftsman, and they would make the chair from beginning to end. But now, he said there is the delineation of labor. So now what's happening in our society is you put in one screw. Your job is, all day I put in one screw. And then eventually we had the assembly line. And your job is to put in one screw. So now when you meet someone and they say, what do you do? What's your profession? You don't say, I'm a craftsman and I'm a carpenter. You say, I put in screws. And then that leads to this crisis of being. But he also said something that was interesting, that look, we need luxury goods in society. I want to show you how it's possible for a theory to be good, but that theory to be misused and then practically be misimplemented, and society suffers and you don't even realize it. What is it? Look, the reality was, the argument was, we need luxury goods, the Louis Vuitton, Prada, Gucci, whatever you have. We need them because luxury goods will be made and the wealthy will buy it, but they will be made by the middle class and the poor, and the wealthy will buy it and it will circulate the income. That was the theory. But fast forward to 2023, in Australia, America, Canada, and the United Kingdom, the tables are turned. Luxury products are made by the wealthiest people in the world, and they are bought by the poor and the middle class on credit. And so the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. But you're not aware of that cycle because the society's drift is, oh, I have to have something nice, expensive, flashy. And you don't realize it, and the system makes you work like an animal and spend like a madman. And the reality is, Islam was not against either. By the way, Islam has embedded in it capitalism and communism. It looks at the social welfare of people, but it also encouraged, it said you can have private property. You can have private land. You can have private. So if someone wants to go further, they're allowed to do so. So I know that this is not for everyone. But 5%, 10%, 15% of our community should be entrepreneurs in light of the Ahlul Bayt. And you may say that this is something that is, where does this come from Islam? Example, Ayatollah Shahabadi. Ayatollah Shahabadi is who? Ayatollah Shahabadi is an Arif who was one of the teachers of Ayatollah Khomeini. Ayatollah Shahabadi was an Arif. Some called him Arif Kamil in a spiritual sense. He was a spiritual mystic. So he was in Tehran and he used to lead the Salah. He would lead the Jamaat. When he would lead the Jamaat there, at that point in time, one day he told people, when will you elevate yourself spiritually? When will you raise yourself? And when will you get to a higher level spiritually? And the people who used to come to his Salatul Jama'ah were all merchants and businessmen. And they said, Agha, we are merchants. How can we become spiritual and become a high level? We work all day, we do business all day. He said, if anyone wants the antidote, I will tell you. And I will tell you according to what you need to do. Come to me afterwards. So one merchant came to him. He said, Agha, you said this. I want to go higher spiritually, but I don't know how I can. It's like someone who's stuck in work and they want to get an education, but they say, I don't know how I can. Do an irada, do a niyyah, and Allah will make a way for you. And then the community should also step in to help to support in the community framework. Nonetheless, he said, you want to know? He said, I will tell you. Just implement the following. Now he would say, read the Quran 10 times, read this dua 100 times, do this 1,000,000 times. But he said, no. He said, I'll tell you just a couple of things. Remember these and they'll help you. And you will go to a higher spiritual level. He said, what? He said, number one, as much as possible, read your salah on time in Jamaat. As much as possible, read your salah on time in Jamaat, in a congregation. So number one. He said, okay, I'm in the bazaar, and I come to this Jamaat. That should be fair enough, no problem. Number one. He said, number two, no matter who comes to your shop and your business, foreigner or local, you treat them fairly. Sometimes when a foreigner comes, we have this in our parts of tourist areas in Florida. If there's a tourist, sometimes people price gouge. He said, you need to make sure that no matter who it is, you take what profit is acceptable and reasonable, but you do not price gouge and treat them unfairly. He said, oh, very good. Okay, I'll do that. He said, number three. He said, I know that khums is annually. I know khums is annually, but I'm telling you to take it out monthly. And just do this. Khums says, 1/5 of savings. And of course, once you take it out on an amount, you don't have to keep taking it out. Once you take it out on one amount, it's done. So he said, okay. He left. He went back to work. He said, I implemented this program that Ayatollah Shahabadi had told me. I implemented it for about 2 to 3 months. When I implemented it, and I kept it to heart, and I did everything that he said, I didn't know the wisdom at that time, but he said, I was reciting salah one day after about 3 months in another jama'at, in another place. And when I was reciting salat in this other place, eventually what happened was, I was in the salah and the imam of the salah, the pesh imam of the salah, he was said Allahu Akbar, Takbiratul Ihram. I'm standing behind him, I say Allahu Akbar. We enter into salah, and then eventually after a few minutes, we go into ruku, he gets up again, and then I notice he disappears, gone. He said a little bit later, I noticed he was in sajda. Then he got up again, and then he was in qiyam. I followed him in qiyam, and then a little bit later he disappeared. I said, what just happened? He said, after salah, when everyone left, I went to the imam of the salah, the pesh imam of the salah. I said, you know, when I was praying behind you, you were, I don't know how to explain this, others wouldn't understand, but look, I noticed in salah, after you said Takbiratul Ihram, you disappeared in salah. And you ended up in ruku and then eventually sujood, and then you disappeared again. What was happening? He said, you saw that? He said, yes. He said, you know, I had a big family issue I was dealing with before salah, and I couldn't get that off my mind in salah. So at times in salah, my tawajjuh, my focus was going there. He said, you saw me, and those were those times that you mentioned. He said, you saw that? He said, yes. At that point in time, he realized what Ayatollah Shahabadi had said was not a joke. You see, Islam doesn't say that you just have to forsake the world and live in a closed room in order to get iman and deen. No. You live in the maidan. You live in the battlefield of life, and through that you get spirituality. And you go to higher levels. And if anyone teaches us that, it is the likes of Abbas alayhi salam. You see, the Ahlul Bayt, my dear brothers and sisters, I'm not saying this to, in any way, to overburden you. Do hard work and learn. Discuss with others. Get mentors and teachers in the area of knowledge and business and entrepreneurship. Then do tawassul to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through the Ahlul Bayt. Do you know Ja'far al-Tayyar? Ja'far al-Tayyar, the brother of Ali al-Murtaza, Ali ibn Abi Talib, his son, his name was Abdullah ibn Ja'far al-Tayyar. Abdullah ibn Ja'far al-Tayyar was the husband of Zainab salamullahi alayha. Abdullah ibn Ja'far al-Tayyar was the wealthiest person in all of Arabia. He was the World Bank, IMF, you name it, Federal Reserve, all in one person. Governments, when they didn't have money, they would come to him to get a loan. Why? Because when his father died, eventually what happened was Rasulullah came for taziyah, he came for condolences. And he said, what are you doing, my child? Abdullah ibn Ja'far Tayyar was very young at the time. And he was playing, and he said, I'm doing business, inshallah. And you know how people play with Monopoly, or they do these types of games and play? So he was doing this. Rasulullah put his hand on the head of Abdullah ibn Ja'far Tayyar. There are some moments that the riwayat say if you do dua at that moment, it's accepted straight away. One is when you see the Kaaba for the first time. Another is when you put your hand on the head of an orphan and do dua to Allah, it's accepted straight away. So Allah gave him so much barakah that he was able to excel. That's why Sayyida Zainab is called not Saniya Zahra. She's actually called, according to riwayat, Saniya Khadija. Because the same way Khadija salamullahi alayha gave all her wealth and went to sacrifice in Shabbir Kirmani and she gave her life, the same way Zainab gave everything and she went to Karbala. Now, study, work hard, do entrepreneurship, and do the tawassul of Ahlul Bayt to get truth. And to get that, I'll give you a gift tonight by Bab al-Hawaj. The gift is, if you're in your most difficult and dire times, 133 times recite Ya Kashif al-Karbi an Wajh al-Husayn Ikshif Karbi bihaqqi akhika al-Husayn. This is something that is mujarrab in terms of its riwayat and in what the scholars tell us. It is an istighasa to Imam Hussain and through Hazrat Abbas alayhi salam. 133 times, because Abbas's name, when it's converted into numbers, becomes 133. Abbas is one of the Bab al-Hawaj. Imam al-Kadhim, Aliun al-Azhar, Muslim ibn Aqil is known as Safir Hussain. And of course, Abu al-Fadl Abbas. The poet says, Sakhi Hussain ke Abbas ka hai ye roza, darakht mangne aate hain is jagah saya, yahi chamakta hai aakar har ek aina, dayare Babul Hawaij hai faiz ka chashma, और बड़े बड़ों का मुकद्दर संवरते देखा है और समंदरों को यहाँ मश्क भरते देखा है. This idea of Abul Fadl al-Abbas is that place where the oceans go in order to gather their hajat. Abbas is not to be taken lightly. Do tawassul through the Ahlul Bayt, through Abul Fadl al-Abbas, to give you success in your life, your education, your entrepreneurship, so that you can help others the way the Ahlul Bayt helped others.